Welcome to the March 20th meeting of the Falmouth Conservation Commission. This meeting is solely for the purpose of regulation review for potential changes, revisions, adjustments. Nothing will be voted on anyway, but particularly not today because we don't have a quorum. So we're just gonna discuss a few things. First thing's up are the minutes for January 16, February 20th, which we can't vote, we don't have a quorum, so we'll push that off. We'll procrastinate. So regulation topics, current ones anyway, are V-zone enclosures, square feet, or percentage of footprint for new construction. I don't know how productive we're gonna be on this, but what the heck?
Yeah, so based on our last.
What do you guys think of that? Square footage or percentage of the floor?
Yeah, so Jen and I talked about it, and we were thinking that square footage might be the easiest. Percentage seems to vary depending on the size of the structure. However, we just proposed maybe 100 square foot storage space and a 200 square foot enclosed space, just as a starting point for
I saw that,
construction.
and
Yeah,
That's
that's
I mean,
fine, but
100
would it
square
be
feet.
combined, or are you saying it could be either or?
100 plus 200.
accumulative,
It could be combined.
yeah,
Okay.
maybe up to 200 for an enclosed space, and up to 100, or.
But we're trying to show the
included.
distinction between
But you could have two.
like stairway enclosure versus
Yes.
storage, okay?
Correct. Yeah, so 100 square feet, 10 by 10 shed, just picture.
But basically, if they come in with 300 square feet of enclosed space,
That's okay. We don't care what's in it.
right, well, so that's, begs the obvious question is, do we just say it's 300 square feet? I don't know, just,
Yeah, the last time you guys were
what
talking about
advantage is
separating.
there to saying, this chair doesn't recline? You know, separating the two. That's rhetorical, I'm just thinking out loud.
I think you guys were talking about last time, trying to figure out what is the standard size of an elevator in these houses, how big of a stairway do you need? And it sounded like we were talking about one, it came up to percentage, and you had done it out, and it was like 80 square feet. You said that's not enough to fit everything. So perhaps going by percentage, unless you had a caveat in there of some kind of percentage or such and such square feet, if it's greater or less than, I don't know what the correct equation would be. But to be an exception for those really small properties, to give them a little bit more space, or vice versa, to restrict the larger properties. So I don't think there's a right answer. I think you can go either way.
You're better off being standard.
I mean, what we could do is sort of,
Then you know before you start.
Yeah, I mean, we always use 200, and then it just kind of,
But it crept a little bit because of, well, we're gonna have an elevator or this or that. You
Yeah.
got 300 square feet. You can use it as you like.
yeah.
I've seen it vary in my time, kind of when I started, you guys were on the higher scale, and then we were down on the lower scale, and now we're somewhere in the middle. So
Hi,
it
Courtney.
seems like,
How you doing?
based on
Hey, Court.
recent
How you doing?
comments, they've been able to reduce into the more 250 and 300 range. So that seems to be the most
I think
popular
that,
square footage.
Yeah, and I think that's fairer than percentage.
Yeah, there's some right next to you, Court.
Some more propaganda?
Either one.
all right. When to require a house to be elevated on pilings? This came up because of number 4, right?
Yes, number 4 Picasset. So Jen and I went through the regulations, particularly in the velocity zone, or,
Do we,
Staff knows.
am I that late? Is this, I thought it was 3:30.
It is, it's 3:36
we
now.
don't have a quorum, Court, so we're just kind of talking openly. In the land subject to coastal storm flowage regulations, there's always been that regulation about the 200 square foot size that we've gone back and forth on. What we were offering as a suggestion was amending that to include a provision to help prevent situations like that from happening again, where the deck was reconstructed into enclosed space and very, very.
Is that in our purview? Whether it's on pilings or not, or is that,
Our purview is to protect the environment.
I just think that would be more of a building.
Well, it is gonna be built on small sonotubes. Gary did not allow for the frost walls to be installed, because it is very wet and, there's a lot of wave activity over there. He was concerned about having something in the ground and not being stable.
So using that one for an example,
Yep.
what would, we would have required, if we wanted to, we would have required it to be on pilings because it's closer than 50 feet, or just because it's in a V zone?
It seemed like a site where it would have benefited the structure from being elevated on pilings. The site was very wet. It seems to get inundated a lot. So it looked like that could have been the best thing for the structure. Also, the salt marsh was being cut, so that wasn't as stable as it could have been. It was something that was enough where a couple commissioners and Jen were uncomfortable with the situation, so we were thinking of augmenting that regulation a bit. Because in this case, they never actually touched the 200 square feet. It was all previous structure. They just changed it from something flat to something 3D. So it was just a swap for square footage.
Jamie, correct me, but I think the code is, building code is, if it's more than 50% of the cost of the construction, it has to be elevated on pilings, is that correct?
Yes, if it's more than 50% of the value of the house.
Of the structure,
Only
not
house
the
is
land.
Correct.
I think that's on a yearly basis, though.
Sorry?
Isn't that on a yearly basis?
Is that on what?
A year, like, for example, it's not the entire project. If you
No,
go
it's just
one
the
project-
structure.
Yeah,
That's what a lot of people don't understand, because, like a property like that, I didn't look it up, I don't know what it is, so I'm making this up. But let's say they said the value of that property is 800,000, but the house is probably only worth 75, because it's location.
right.
So, using that example, the 75, they can only remodel up to half of that without triggering all the current codes.
Yeah.
And there's different ways of
Yeah.
skirting that, and there's things that aren't factored in, like finishes, for example. So you can't do as much as, because some people look and they go, oh, I got a $2 million property. Yeah, but the house is only worth 500, which is still good, don't get me wrong, but that means you're limited to 250. And there's not a lot you can do for 250 when you talk about a major remodel.
Sure.
Some of these houses that are going up, an elevator's 125,
Okay.
so you look at stuff like that and
How does the building code, you're doing this more frequently than I do now. The game people played was successive permits. Has that been
Yeah, that's
squashed?
what this is, that's what, for our code, this is adding on, and then 2 years later, adding on.
Yeah, that's what I meant. by-
But once the
Adding on.
permit's closed out, project's over. So if the permit's closed out and they get a reassessment,
No, that's for the building. But for
Oh, yeah.
our project, you only have 200 square feet
in a
But-
velocity zone.
in a
right?
velocity zone. Well, okay, I'm gonna attach this year, I'm gonna attach this
Well, the
shed
200 square
to
feet
the
is
house.
cumulative, right, we were just talking about the value of,
Yeah. But that's what happens, they keep,
Right, so our suggestion was to make that a bit more restrictive to, go ahead.
so if we allow that 300, that takes the whole 200 out of the equation.
Well, those were always two different numbers, they just happened to be the same number. So that would be.
aren't we on 2?
Yes,
Yeah, we're not on what's underneath. We're not on, we're finished with 1.
yeah, they just happen to be the same number, so it's commonly determined.
Well, you moved on, we hadn't.
He had,
What?
All right.
Moved on to number 2.
So that was our recommendation, was to
Okay.
try to add some language
Oh, we
about,
start there.
instead of
Yeah, yeah.
just what it
That's
says
where I
here, in
was.
addition to the
Well,
structure,
you're in the right
it would be
place.
more
It's
converting
unusual.
a 2D deck
Because I'm next.
structure into an enclosed space, try to restrict that, and instead require it to go up on filings. We also proposed a distance as a setback to the resource area. Jen and I took out a big long tape measure, put it down the hallway, 25 feet looked pretty short, so we figured a 50 is kind of your typical zone A, you know, based on what you'd see over there. So we had just recommended maybe adding a setback. So what we can do is put something together for your guys' review, or we can, even though we talked about this perhaps being the last meeting for a while, we can have one more in hopes of having a forum for more discussion.
You know, this is a matter of words. You have a, and I'm back to 1B, but enclosed space, I should read conditioned space as well.
Okay, because we were thinking about, you know, what if they say, oh, it's storage or it's this, so conditioned means.
By conditioned space, so you walk in a foyer and go upstairs. The
Mhm.
odds are it's insulated and
Insulated.
there's heat and AC and,
Okay. Yeah, Jen had a couple other notes.
I would say
this morning.
enclosed and conditioned space.
Conditioned.
Add, don't switch it, just add it.
Well, you
Yeah.
wouldn't condition storage space necessarily.
No, but
Yeah, no, you wouldn't condition storage space necessarily. But I think, it's a,
Where are you at, Beth?
it's a,
well, he switched back to 1.
yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to just confuse things.
I just wanted to ask, if you already said it, I'm sorry, but I wanted to ask about the greater than 50 feet from resource area.
Yeah, I have a comment on that too. Since many of the resource areas that this would be a 100-foot A zone, why don't we say outside, it has to be located outside the A zone?
But, okay, but here's my question, is that was pre-existing? Well, this is where we get,
Well, the deck was pre-existing, but now they want to they want to make it a 3D structure.
right, and in other circumstances, we would allow that, meaning they already have the footprint.
Right.
So my question goes to, is that deck already exists?
Right.
Albeit the resource area at the moment.
Right, but it exists right near, or very close to the salt marsh.
But that's my point, it exists, and it's under that 50 foot.
I don't
So,
even know if the lot's 100 feet. Like in this case, it was a very small condensed property. So I think we didn't go with 100 just because some of these lots are itty-bitty right on the water. It would encompass the whole property.
Well, then they shouldn't be doing it. They shouldn't be putting a 3-dimensional structure there.
Yeah, that's,
I'm looking in terms of the damage to the resources.
I get it, I'm not fighting that, I'm just saying that that deck existed.
Yeah, the deck's fine, and they can keep the deck. They just can't build a 3-dimensional structure on it.
they can't turn it into
It's like being
habitable
married,
space.
I know I'm not gonna win, but it's fun competing. Courtney,
No, I think that's reasonable. We used to fight over the term creep, remember that one?
Mm.
You know, so you'd have somebody put a deck or a patio out there and say, oh, well, that's our footprint, and then they want to put an addition on it, and we'd have heart attacks over that. So, kind of the same thing. So I think you have to use the word habitable. That,
well, we have to agree on what's pre-existing.
And it's the deck.
yeah. But I mean, if that deck was clearly pre-existing, correct? Before, I mean, in other words, had that deck actually been permitted or allowed?
It was there for decades.
Or is it one of those things that went back to 1680 or something?
It was a long time, it was there.
Well, and that's the problem with some of these properties. I mean, there's nothing you can do about it. They predated regulations.
Yeah, but adding the additions doesn't
So we're.
that isn't before regulations.
Right, so they predate, the deck will say predated the regulation. But now by enclosing it, you're changing the use. And that's
You
where.
can't add to a violation. That's what the building code says. I just go by some of the projects we've had. We've had some recently where somebody has a deck or whatever, and we allow them to change it to habitable space.
Which is fine, but it's not within X number of feet of a resource in a velocity zone. That's what the issue is here.
Yeah, so I think we just have to get wording in there that gives us the authority not to say, we're sorry.
So that's a case where that shouldn't have been allowed, and then if it was new, it wouldn't have been allowed anyway.
Right,
Closer than 50 feet, closer than 100 feet.
Right, like there's no structure there?
So it's kind of a non-issue, really.
I
Well,
mean,
kind of a gray area.
Well, you can rebuild in time. I mean, like, then you were around, but nobody else was around when there was a old hunting cottage in Bourne's Pond. I mean, basically, it was out and built partway into Bourne's Pond, and they wanted to redo it. Well, really, it shouldn't be there at all, but it has been there forever. So
Right.
they were allowed to do it right in the footprint, but not to expand. So in this case, they could rebuild the deck, that's fine, they just
But
can't,
not expand.
correct,
and they can't change the use.
correct.
Because basically what they were proposing was to tear the deck off and build a habitable space in the same footprint, basically.
Right,
I mean, they were pouring a 4-foot cross wall underneath and all kinds of
well, you
stuff.
said it was gonna be sonotubes.
Gary's gonna require them to change. Mm.
Well, that's how the whole part of this debate started, was, you know, full frost walls or piers.
Yeah, that's right. They wanted to they wanted to put a wall there.
Yeah,
They wanted to put a wall and we told them they had to put piers. But still, you know, the key is the use is being changed. So even though,
well, that's how you look at it as a builder. The key to me is they wanna put a three-dimensional structure in what's now a two-dimensional space.
okay,
Okay, so playing devil's advocate, how does that change the resources?
If there's a storm, there's gonna be a lot more damage from waves slamming into a... Just look at the pictures of Florida after the hurricanes.
Yeah, but you see, the one house that survived was the guy
Well,
that
he
was
was
a
up
builder
on-
from Rhode Island.
But he was up on pilings,
He was
way up on pilings.
Well, so were the 4 houses around him. Well, they used to be on pilings, now they're in the Atlantic somewhere. But it's how the whole place is constructed, you know?
yeah, I mean, I think clearly that deck was a pre-existing thing which we would allow. And if somebody came in and said, I'd like to repair it, we would, you know, without changing the footprint, we would allow them to do that because it was a pre-existing condition. But they are actually changing the use of the thing. By closing it, they're turning it into habitable space. It's a whole different, the scope of it and the use of it is altogether different. You know,
And the effect it would have on the environment if there was a storm.
right. But I mean, exactly. So it's all of the above. So I think we just write our regulations and say, no, you can't do that. You're changing the use, you're changing the purpose, you're expanding on what was there. You can replace, you can fix what's there, but you can't change it.
Okay.
All right, moving on. Moving on.
Hey,
Fire pits in an A zone.
So I haven't really added much, or really anything to the summary of it. It seemed like that was still an open topic, kind of going a bit back and forth on what the commission felt like we wanted to pursue, and we didn't know if you had any additional comments at this time.
I think this is fine. The only thing I have an issue with, if you will, is calling it removable or not allowing it to be a mortared-in masonry structure, because
In
people
terms
aren't
of
gonna
the
pick
pit
the,
itself?
I'm sorry?
In terms of the pit itself, not the.
Yeah.
Okay.
The, you know, people aren't gonna pick up a fire pit and move it. They're not.
No.
I mean, most people don't even put their lawn furniture away, right? And then having something that's mortared in, by definition, it's not going anywhere anyway. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, it will if there's a tsunami, but,
right. But then everything's going, so
yeah.
that's my only hang-up, but I'm not gonna follow my sword over it, so.
So are we defining 150 square feet? Is that the area of disturbance, or is that the size of the pit? We should be clear about that.
Well, it says right in here that it's includes the seating, so it's all inclusive. So if you wanna make a bigger fire pit proper and less seating, that's your problem. But if you want a small one and more seating,
Right, well, I think that should be,
Yeah, but,
it is in there. Read the last
yeah, but not down to there.
draft definition, fire pit.
Jimmy, how do you feel about, in these, if they were.
oh, and associated seating, yeah, okay.
But I think it would be clear, but 150 feet includes seating.
Yeah, that's the piece I have the issue with, is just that removable. I just don't see that happening.
Yeah,
You might kind of,
that's
Sorry,
right. You can,
Me
you can still put the
personally,
definition.
I would rather see,
So,
I'd rather see it a masonry structure. I think it's stronger.
Sure.
It's not going anywhere. You know,
so the two teachers over here are agreed. That is, in the 150, it says in Roman numeral 1, or I, it says 150 feet maximum size. And we're saying that including seating and the pit itself, even though you
Even
have,
though you have it
even
in
though it's in the
definition.
definition.
Those are just notes, that's not gonna be.
Yeah, I mean, even though it's down here in the definition,
even
people's
though it's
eye
in
are
there,
gonna
it's
see
not.
it. They're gonna read the 160, 150 feet, and they're not
That's
gonna
just
look
that's
elsewhere.
just a note for you, that's not gonna be put in the reg, just the definition.
Uh,
That was just me summarizing everyone's bullet points about what they wanted to see. So the definition is me including all that together. Do you like the definition of how
Yeah, I
it's
think it
succeeding?
should be, I think it should be defined there,
Okay,
just so there's no question.
okay.
If I had hair, I'd be splitting them right now.
No, I hear you. I mean, I understand your point, but I'm just, give them an inch and they'll take a mile.
I know what you mean.
Really? I didn't notice. All right, we good with that then?
So
Yeah.
you're good with the draft definition, were you good with the draft revision? Oh, I didn't print the red, I'm sorry.
Yep. Such a definition for fire pits and their associated patios, but rather address them on a case by case. Well,
Oh,
I
that
always
was
think,
just our comments at the end. That's not part of the definition, yeah. But if you're good with that, then we'll pursue it. I think that's where you guys stood the last time, so I don't think we're deciding anything new tonight.
moving on,
Moving on.
vista pruning.
Yes.
Further, this is the one regarding vista pruning across property. Staff finds that the commission.
So I have
What was
some-
the purpose of bringing this up? Remind me?
So this was proposed by Maury to have a discussion on, and I think it was a good thing because we wanted to bring it up too. I do have some notes about different parts of this
You have a lot of
section.
notes.
I'm the keeper of notes. Number one, we've seen that a couple times last year. There was, I think, things coming
I
in threes,
remember
we saw
now.
3. proposed vistas that go across properties. There was one property that was town property and 600 feet away. There was one that was someone else's property and they already had a vista. I can't remember the third one, but we just figured it might be a good opportunity to actually incorporate into our regs how the commission feels about vistas. Do we look upon them fondly about being across properties, or should they just be if you happen to be on the frontage of a water body or something someone wanted a view on, you know,
Well,
just not
You
exceeding.
do realize
the-
that the town taxes more for people who have water views? And so if they buy a house and they have a water view, and 10 years later, the trees ahead of them block that view, but they're still getting charged taxing
For a view, yeah.
for a view.
Okay, since we're splitting hairs, you're implying that certain people have a higher tax rate. That's not the case. They have a higher value.
And that can be raised.
They don't have a different tax rate. Falmouth has a straight tax rate,
Oh, it's a straight tax rate, but
but a value is different.
value-
Your house might be worth more than my house because you're closer to the water than I am.
Right.
Well,
It's
because
the
I have a
assess-
water
It's based
view
on
and
the
you don't.
assessed valuation.
Oh, every time it rains, I do. Never mind.
not like I do.
No, you're right. You win. You win. All right,
So yeah, that was just a topic.
so maybe a percentage is more in line.
I think that's if we stay on just A before we get into like percentage or square
Okay.
footage, it would, I know we can't decide anything today, but that did come up a couple times last year.
I
The board
do think
routinely denied
that people
those
are-
permits.
I do think people should have a view.
Okay.
And
so-
it doesn't have to, it doesn't mean they have to clear a lot of vegetation, but it might just be taking one limb down.
So
I
even
like
if
the
it's-
idea of the
We
percentage.
skipped over A, didn't we?
I was trying to stick to A.
So
Or my
you
fault.
could actually say 25 feet or a percentage.
On the first one, let's go back to A before we go to B.
By the way,
I didn't get a clear consensus.
as a English teacher proofreading in C, you have a new word called agreeance. There's agreement, but agreeance I don't believe is a
I'll
word.
let Microsoft Word know it's not a word.
It's agreement.
Thank you, Clinton.
Anyway, I like the
Was
idea
all
of
my other
percentage.
notes good?
Are we back on A?
I hope so.
Vistas across several properties.
I don't agree with you.
What's that?
I don't think if somebody has 1,000 feet, if you have 25 feet, that's 25% of a, most lots are 100 feet. But if they have 1,000 feet, I don't think they should have 250 feet of vistas. You might say that they could have
We're on B.
2 vistas.
Okay. So you're
Well,
good,
you
you're
could-
I
good with
already told you what, for A.
I know. So you're good with a 25 foot?
Well,
no,
I
think-
don't
think
don't
if
mind
it's-
that
I think if
percentage,
it's
but you
above a
could
certain amount,
you
maybe
could
you could
limit
have
the,
2 or 3.
Okay.
If it's above
you could limit the percent.
200 feet,
Yeah.
you could have 2. If it's above 200 feet, you could have 3 vistas. I mean, we're talking about giant houses, right?
Yeah.
In these big lots that you might want to look out this way and this way.
So you're saying they
That
could
young
be
man over
allowed
there who's
multiple,
working hard?
but not contiguous?
Yeah,
So it could be a percentage with a maximum per,
uh,
or you're gonna say that a maximum of 3?
a maximum of 3.
So you're onto something
If
because.
it's more than 200 feet frontage, then you have a maximum of 3.
So you're onto something. You could say use a percentage, but that they have to have clusters of vegetation. Let's say they have 1,000-foot property, and we say up to 25%, or whatever that is. So, but they would have, they
10
couldn't,
vistas.
they would have to put, like, keep trees. They couldn't just mow it down
That's
for
what
that.
Betsy just said.
They couldn't just mow it down for 75 feet. They could go 25 and have a cluster of trees 25 in a cluster of trees, but you could give them some flexibility. So that would satisfy, and little buffer thingies
Not,
for the
it
birds.
wouldn't satisfy me entirely, because
We'll work on
you
it.
wanna have a contiguous buffer
Yes.
for,
Yes, we would allow
wildlife.
tree removal anyway,
yeah.
so, okay.
I think we should play it conservative and say maximum of two,
Two
Two.
vistas
Yeah, that's fine,
two separate.
yeah.
on a
That's my
case-by-case
opinion.
basis.
Yeah.
Depending on having a survey in particular on frontage and,
Exactly.
okay, so, okay.
But
We'll-
maybe
we'll
we do have to say
explore
that a minimum between the two.
So that's what I was trying to get at is,
Yeah, but if you don't take any trees down, then,
Yeah, we do
Does it-
select sapling removal. As much as I understand that dead wood is great, sometimes taking a couple dead trees down if they're in the way.
for review,
helps.
yes.
Makes it, you know,
To the
More
detriment
agreeable
of the
process.
woodpeckers.
I mean, the other
just
thing
leaves
is,
it debris.
when you allow a vista corridor, that doesn't mean they can slice 25 feet vertically down and then mow
Some
it
people think
across
they
and
can.
have grass, can they?
Right, no, it doesn't.
I mean,
Although we have seen people,
no, that's not, in other
But we
words,
sh-
I'm not opposed to allowing a greater amount of
Okay,
clearing,
you're
but,
open to that.
you know, it's what is the clearing? Is there plenty of understory left? Is there, you know, are there trees? Can you look through it? And
Okay.
essentially thinning up above so you get the view. I mean, it's, but the question is, how do you write that up?
Well, it's already in there,
Most of
isn't
it's
it?
already written. It's just really the width that we're
Yeah.
asking you about.
So, I
We
mean,
have
if
the
we're.
height, we have all the stuff they can do, it's just the width.
Yeah,
People
So,
tend to want a wider view, and as you said, some properties are just simply larger and perhaps can accommodate more of a wider view that won't, you know, sustain any more damage to the area. So that's really the question is, and which I think you've answered, you would be open to a wider view under particular criteria.
I'm sorry, you said you're done with it, but can we just go back to A for 1 second? What did you,
I said I think people should be able to have a view, even if they're one or two houses back.
okay, but I think what this asks is how we would allow it over other properties, like that circumstance down in Quistit Harbor.
Mm-hmm.
Am I right? Okay. So, you're right, if you're 3 removed, but you're on a higher elevation, you should be able to have
But the trees have
a
grown up.
vista corridor.
Right,
I get it.
but you
what-
have to get permission of the other properties.
No, well, wait a minute, wait. The question is, if it's only for your property, then that's a non-issue. If it's over several properties, you need all the other people to apply as well.
Correct.
So that brings up the
Well, that's what we
question.
already do.
Mhm. So it's more of if you are open to allowing more than one vista on a property, then what if that subject property already has a view? Then the person 3 houses behind can't have one. So if you allow more than one vista on properties,
Oh, you could, it would work.
it would, but maybe they don't have a big enough property. Maybe it doesn't meet that percentage.
so you run into a situation like this. You have a house on a hill, and there's another lot, and then there's another lot, okay? So the house on the hill looks out this way. So he gets permission from the other owners to cut it down so he has this nice view. But meanwhile, that doesn't do anything because of the geography and topography for the guys in between. That guy and the one on the shore. And they want to put a vista.
Yeah, but but none of these are in our jurisdiction, are they? You're up on a hill.
Well, that was a unique circumstance where you were several houses away, but we had one on Old Dock that was right across the street. They just happened to have an elevated deck
Right.
that was still in jurisdiction, and the folks on the subject
right.
property were okay with some minor trimming, but again, they already had a vista, so
Yeah.
that was denied.
Like that
Okay.
So.
guy
just
in
forgot.
Maine, a couple in Maine that, you heard about them?
Oh, they poisoned the trees.
Poison the trees in the yard in front.
That was the same poison that was used, I think it was Auburn. It was Auburn and, is Auburn?
All right.
Auburn in Alabama?
Say that again?
Auburn.
Auburn.
It's a state school in Alabama, right?
Yeah.
And there was a beautiful tree, you know, like 300-year-old tree, where everybody would gather
Good with
before
that.
the football game, and somebody
Good
put
enough
that
with
poison in.
that.
Do you wanna talk about C and B? C and D, I have some notes on that.
Yeah.
So I sent over some Vistaprune materials, including Falmouth as well as some other towns. What I would like to do is our guidelines, such as hiring a certified arborist, meeting on site, visiting the site once it's done. We're hoping to include all of that in the actual regulations. It's something that we've always practiced.
Yeah,
And other towns have that as well, written in their regulations, so I think it was looked on favorably last time when we had spoken about it. So just kind of confirming that that made sense to everyone.
I mean, you know, it sort of adds to the regulations and how many people actually look at the regulations? Not that many, but if somebody did, I mean, vista pruning is kind of a common thing.
Yeah.
And it's like, not that complex to understand what we're doing. So as much as people can understand, the better.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just having that in writing too
Mhm.
is helpful. I did review the materials from the other towns. I know you had notes last time, Betsy. I just had a couple points that might be worth discussion or actually including in words in the
Okay.
regulations. For example, just no work in an actual wetland or in a salt marsh. The cutting is only restricted to the buffer. So we've always talked about that, but it's never been written. So. put it in
Dave.
writing. Hi, Steve. Seemed to be like an obvious step forward, if that makes sense to everyone. Okay. Let's see. We had been talking about potentially requiring plans from people when they want vistas, if it's at an odd angle, if they want a larger percentage of a vista. So I did find language in one of the other towns' regs, where it just said, you know, wetland delineations and plot plans may be required. So we can just put it in writing somewhere as we figure out how we feel about percentages and different widths and stuff. Let's see.
You know, there's some that you probably wouldn't need that. I mean, there are a lot you probably wouldn't need
Most we
that.
probably don't,
But if you have it in there,
just in writing.
maybe required. Maybe it's always problematic in regulations
Okay,
because,
What do you mean?
because people always argue, well, wait a minute, why didn't you let me? You
sure.
let him and you let him.
We can add more context to
Yeah.
that. We're on 4, Steve, we're on Vista Burning.
That damn precedent.
What do we do in a building with multiple units, multiple owners, who all want a vista?
So at this point, that hasn't been included in the regulations. I feel like there has been guidance from council about that in the past. I don't know for a fact. I can ask Jen to look into it, and we can bring it to you guys.
That's an
and
excellent question
her
because we
knowledge.
already know of an issue.
Yeah, I mean, the Cape Codder was a perfect
Right.
case in point.
Yeah, yeah, so
I'm
that was
thinking
really
of
helpful.
another project that I won't mention because I live there.
No, but that's come up in the past, and it's really important. to-
Yeah, I own this
Yeah.
much, and they own that much, and I want a vista.
Yeah,
All right.
Okay, yeah, we can do more research into that one. Something that
So
other.
speaking about that, you guys who lived here for a long time, apparently, you know, trying to think of what it's called. It's where Chris Tulke used to live, that neighborhood
Where's
That-
that? Chris
in West Falmouth.
Folke,
Yeah, Craggy Ridge.
Craggy Ridge, yeah.
That was built with, in the deeds, people have ocean views. But I mean, it was built like 40 years ago. So of course, none of them have ocean views anymore.
How do you deed something like that?
I
I
don't
mean,
know.
beach access is one thing, but a view, how do you,
Yeah, I mean, vegetation's gonna grow, right?
Yeah, I think it's more for structures. You can't put a block, you can't block my
Block it
view
with
with
it.
your
oh,
house.
I can't put my garage in front of your
Well,
house?
that's a good thing, because people actually do that. They
Oh,
Yeah,
they
well-
design their houses to block their neighbors.
How many
Oh,
times
to
do
essentially
we
block.
see people
Intentionally
come
block.
in?
That's happened a few times here. We've had cases come in front of Concom.
Yeah, we see that all the time. That's one of the reasons for your little speech.
No, you're like.
We're only dealing with conservation, not zoning, you know? But, you know,
Sometimes that line is blurred.
it is.
As are many property lines that aren't properly surveyed.
Oh,
That's my line, no, that's my line.
Because what is there's a, something in the regulations, in our regulations, about aesthetics.
There is somebody.
Yeah, about the word aesthetics, and of course, how
Oh,
subjective is.
That's in the eye of the beholder, right?
Yeah, that is a very subjective concept. So somebody sitting there protesting the garage that's blocking their view is gonna cite the regulations on aesthetics.
Well, I can see that. The view's much nicer than looking at the garage.
Anyway,
And
Where are we? What's
I
next?
just had one other point. There were 4 towns that I found that had time of year restrictions on cutting for vista ferns and attempting to circumvent nesting season.
Nesting season? I think that's a good
Um,
idea.
So they all take place late fall into late winter. So I kind of just took a combination of the times and, you know, we could approve them throughout the year. It might be kind of hard to enforce, but have them actually start work, you know, in the fall or over the winter. I would propose November 1st, because we have some late falls, you know, bird migration is kind of in flux and nesting season, perhaps to the end of March. So that would be a full
Birds are
5
definitely,
months where the cutting could take
definitely
place.
in getting ready to nest now.
Mm. Yeah, you know, April 1st kind of falls around, you know, plovers are coming, spring is here. Do we like the idea of a time of year?
Spring's here today. Does everybody notice that?
I like that idea
Okay.
what's
Yeah.
that?
of a time of year restriction for vista
Yeah, you
ferns.
can't be vista ferning when the birds are active.
Right,
Yeah, because they knock their nest down.
and everybody will say, you're doing it because you don't want the darn tourists to be bothered.
Okay, so we can work on incorporating that too. I think that concludes vistas.
Oh, this was,
That concludes the meeting?
Well, I had a couple brief topics just
Oh,
to
too soon?
introduce, not necessarily to have much discussion on. One, Jen kind of mentioned last week about freshwater ponds and docks that are being constructed in them. We have one particular requirement for both coastal and inland docks where they have to meet 3 feet of water depth. So many of the ponds are pretty shallow where that's pretty hard to meet. Perhaps maybe not ponds that have natural heritage in them, or there could be other restrictions, but our thought was to eliminate that 3-foot water depth or make it shallower so that they have a better chance of achieving the regulations.
The ponds all have limits as to what size motors can be
Correct.
in them.
And some of them can't, you don't allow any,
And some don't allow any.
so that shouldn't be restricted,
Yeah.
really.
Yeah, so if it doesn't allow any, yeah, what difference does it make?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, because it'd be mostly for kayak launching and kids
Right.
jumping off into the water anyway, so, okay.
Could you put a restriction on the draft of the boat?
Why don't,
Well, some of them probably, like they said, I know
In other
before we
words-
looked it up, some ponds don't even allow.
There's no way to regulate that, I mean, there's no way to police that. I think the water depth, if you're gonna do anything, would be
in these
practically.
ponds, I think you're gonna use a motor with a small, you're gonna wanna have it pretty shallow anyway.
So would you want to see that 3 feet, just a smaller number, or just eliminate that altogether as a piece of
You
criteria?
could do 2 feet if it's not motorized.
Say 2 feet, I mean, if you're gonna have a dock,
You need something.
Yeah, but I think if you,
Add float stops too.
that would be my concern, is 2 feet. If they have a motor on there, that It's gonna be a mess.
The problem is these ponds, as we've heard, because we've had ones come in, change depth
Yeah. Some pretty drastically.
by, yeah,
Mm.
like
That's,
a Schumett, when it changes
it's
depth,
drastic,
if it's,
but that's where we require the float stops, right?
Just to keep it from grounding out.
yeah.
Okay.
So even if you have a 3-foot depth when you build it, and you have a dry summer and winter, then it's gonna be less anyway.
Yeah, well, that's what,
Right, so it could be different depending on what season you apply for your dock.
Mhm.
well, yeah, I mean,
Wait till a good spring before you apply.
Right.
at Coonmessett Pond, he learned the hard way. He put in something that assumes that the height, you know, the depth was always gonna stay the same. And the next spring,
Right, right. Because you do, you think of a dock, as a pond as not really fluctuating a whole lot,
yeah,
you know, but they're drastic, you know. I live down near Deep Pond, and sometimes there's a causeway between, you know, one side of the pond to the other.
yeah, it's pretty cool.
You know? So, in a Schumett, I've seen a Schumett with an island in the middle.
Yeah.
I've
Oh, I'll bet.
swum to that, is that the proper English?
Yeah.
Swam to that island.
I think, yeah, I think swam is
All
better.
right, dock improvements?
Yeah, that was just a general question. We've seen a lot of dock projects come before us for reconstructions. Not all the time do these reconstructions require docks to meet current criteria for docks. For example, a dock that could have been constructed a very long time ago, but it happens to go over salt marsh, has decking very close together, it doesn't meet that 50% light penetration. So we've kind of asked applicants to incorporate that into their new structure so that we can meet current standards, but there's nothing requiring that. So just as an example, adding some language to require these reconstructions and improvements to meet as much criteria as possible.
As much as possible.
Yeah.
I think-
Because I mean, decking's easy. You
Yeah.
know, the height might require
Especially
some
if
more
they're gonna
wood.
replace
but-
the decking, replace
Right.
it with something that,
Right. I mean, if they're starting over from scratch again,
yeah.
might as well. You know, we can't necessarily, they might not be able to go out any further or whatnot, but if it's been permanent there and they're just coming back because it's deteriorated, might as well.
Yep, that's a good idea.
So just to have something in writing.
Yep.
Okay. And then the last one is Betsy's Rights of Nature, which were adopted by the select board last year. We had always had the intention of asking everyone if we could incorporate it into our regulations, partly in its full capacity, and somewhere in the regs fully incorporating the resolution, but also I think the staff and the commission have had some concerns over.
Smile for the camera?
I've had some concerns over the years about, in buffers, in flood zones, the ability for clear cutting. So this would help us preserve what we can on these lots, preserve nice hardwood trees, big trees that aren't in the way, asking folks to maybe redesign a bit to allow for more of the natural environment to remain on sites. So we're still exploring how we want to propose that's incorporated into the regs. But in general, just looking for the commission's blessing to include the rights of nature. Because we care about nature.
We're going to agree to.
What's that?
He's already agreed.
Yeah.
There's one.
Okay,
4 thumbs up.
perfect. So that's all we have for today.
And that's official, because now this is a quorum.
Yeah.
That's true. So unless everyone would like to meet one more time to finalize anything, the staff is going to recommend take a break for a couple months while we put these actually together and make the corrections in the regs, present you some drafts to review before we start to, I don't know the full process, but I know we have to advertise and get public comment and whatnot. So I feel like most of the discussion has been had. We've got some good direction from everyone. So, but up to you guys if you'd like to have any more meetings at this time.
It was nice that engineers came to review these two, which was very
Yeah.
helpful. Their comments were very helpful.
Yeah. Well, you know, you give everybody the opportunity, and, you know, if they don't take advantage of it, then, you know, but nobody can say that we didn't try.
Well, I think once we come up with publish a draft, you know, they'll come out of the woodwork then.
Probably.
I don't think there's any
No, there's nothing really
major
that.
changes.
it-
They're
it-
just kind of cleaning stuff up.
Yeah, no, I don't see anything in here that,
But we at some point have to vote, not vote, but, well, vote that this is the final draft, and then we're gonna open it up to public.
Yep.
So how many of those do we have to have, do you remember?
what's that?
Public
hearing.
forums, like 2 or 3?
I don't think it's necessarily that many,
I mean, I
but I
don't-
think there has to be at least one public meeting, maybe more. But then there has to be open for like 4 weeks or 6 weeks or 8 weeks for
Well,
public
right,
comment.
and that's my point, is that everybody, you know, people are gonna have the opportunity to come in and comment, and,
And they
and then
can submit written.
anything,
Right,
any comments. So it's not like we are deciding stuff and then ramming it down everybody's throats. you know what I mean? 'Cause that's the perception we don't want,
Right.
you know.
And it's been
And
so
mostly
long
it's
since we,
clarification, it's not,
it's
we
been
haven't
so
really
long since
changed
we
a
did
whole
it.
lot.
Once we go through the public comment period and incorporate any tweaks, is it that we then publish it, or does it have to go to town meeting?
Let's go to town meeting, I
it
think.
does not go to town meeting.
That's what you know,
The wetlands bylaw gives the Conservation Commission the authority to change its regulations according to what we're following.
Okay.
no, that,
So if we afford public comment in a
there's a
public
process.
meeting and
Correct.
then a comment period, then we've afforded everybody the opportunity.
Correct.
Okay. And then we can take a final vote. And we wouldn't necessarily have to do it all at once, although it might be cleaner, but it,
Well, it's cleaner from the point of view that to publish that book, it's better to change it all at once.
yeah. So that's why it may be more than one meeting, because, public meeting, because we may not get through everything in one meeting.
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
And they may require more than one. I don't know.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm
But
thinking.
I know it's at least one.
I thought, Jen, well, it's not relevant
It's written
today.
down, it's in the procedures.
Yeah.
I just don't know it.
Yeah.
We have the information
Yeah.
somewhere.
So maybe we'd have to do it the same way we're doing this, in that, what's today's topics, but then let's review last meeting's topics.
Well, not even by the topics, you do it by the regulation. These have to do with buffer regulations,
Okay.
these have to do with box regulations.
Right. Okay, anything else? Motion to adjourn.
so move.
Second.
Patton? Aye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.